Hey, this is Gina Grad.
Hi, this is Teresa Strasser.
Hi, everyone. This is Mike Errico.
Hey there, this is Casey Cavalier.
I'm Rocky Rose.
And you are listening to The Jay Franzi Show.
Lucky you.
Welcome to The Jay Franzi Show, a behind-the-curtain look at the entertainment industry with insights you can't pay for and stories you've never heard. Now, here's your host, Jay Franzi.
Well, hello, and welcome to the show. I am Jay Franzi, and this is your backstage pass to the music industry. This week, we get to talk with an engineer and a studio owner. We get to talk with Chris Marr. We'll talk to him about his company, Marr Machines, his studio, Welcome to 1979, and we'll talk to him about the importance of giving back to the community through education and, well, a whole lot more. Now, Chris, he is not just a great engineer and a studio owner, but he's an all-around great guy, and I can't wait to talk with him tonight. So if you would like to join in, comment, or fire off any questions, please head over to jfranzi.com. Now, let's get started. What is this thing that I see that is a tape machine and a bar and a blender? Tell me about this.
Well, we sponsor a hole at the AES golf tournament every year, and we had different themes throughout the years. And one day I was like kind of getting ready for it. I'm like, we usually bring drinks and stuff. I've always wanted to make a blender out of a tape machine. So I had this huge plan of actually using the tape machine motors and everything. And then finally I just went to Target and I bought 2 blenders. I took them apart, the whole thing apart, took all the guts out, took the motors out of the tape machine, drilled new holes, mounted them up, wired switches where the fast forward and rewind were, and in about 30 minutes had a blender. And I thought it would only last one golf tournament, and that was like 8 years ago. And it still works. And surprisingly, no one's been electrocuted or injured by it. So it kind of blows my mind.
That is too fun. I remember those golf tournaments. Those were always a blast.
Yeah, it's a great cause. It's for the Nashville Engineer Relief Fund. So it raises money for most recording engineers are self-employed. So if they come into hard times with health issues, it's a fund that helps cover the gap with health insurance and stuff. What we do is we just make margaritas. It's lemonade and tequila, and it's great.
So we're talking about the tape machines. Let's talk about your business of restoring tape machines. So how did that come about?
Quite accidentally. When I was in my early 20s, I worked part-time for Randy Blevins, who is a great guy, and he bought and sold tape machines, consoles, microphones, everything, and kind of solidified my love for MCI tape machines and consoles there, because I was also an assistant engineer at that same time using these machines in studios. And then when I started Welcome to 1979, I outfitted it with a console and a tape machine that I restored. And the studio got a lot of press in magazines, and people were emailing. It's like, man, I'd love to get a tape machine one day. Like, who fixes yours and who restored yours? And I was like, I did. And then I said, well, I'll sell you one. And I'd go buy one and fix it and sell it to them. And then I was just doing that to kind of fund my mic locker, And I think the first year I sold 6 machines. I thought, man, that's crazy. That's like one every other month. And then the next year I sold 12. I'm like, man, that's crazy. That's like one a month. And now throughout the years, now I've got several techs working there in that shop, which is now much bigger. Now we ship between 40 and 60 a year, and they go all over the world. It's really grown into a life of its own.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Is this in the same facility as the studio?
Yes.
So you have a team of people working there in conjunction with the studio doing its thing.
Correct. Yeah, the Marr Machine shop runs Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, and the studio runs 24/7. Yep.
So one of the things you mentioned in there was when you started as an assistant engineer. So Did you take a traditional path to become an engineer?
Yeah, I did. It just kind of like really worked out for me. I went right out of high school into a 2-year community college in Minneapolis for a recording arts program.
What year was that?
That was 1993. And then in 95, my roommate was moving to Nashville from Minneapolis, wanted to check it out. And I rode down with him, and I got an internship, and he got an internship, and we moved here. And then he only stayed in town a couple months, and I've been here ever since. So I went from an internship to assisting on sessions at that studio and other studios. I had this really wonderful assistant engineering career where I worked at about 12 different studios in town on a regular basis.
Let's talk about that for a minute.
Okay.
The internship, where was that?
When I started, it was called Magic Tracks in Berry Hill. And part of my internship was building a new control room. And then they rebranded the studio it was called the Recording Club. And now it's Bobby Holland owns it. It's called Pentaverate. I think I just said that wrong. Bobby, forgive me. So it's kind of cool going there and seeing what he's done to it. So, tried an 80 console, MCI tape machine. This studio didn't have Pro Tools, but it was just right on the cusp,
Well, you talk about that. You're in the early 90s, but you came in at what seems like a perfect time to have a career as an assistant. So when you say that, can you tell us what that is like?
Man, it was just, I couldn't have scripted a better way to learn. And I really felt the industry get stagnant on learning. And I'll describe my life, 6-7 years as an assistant. There was several scenarios. Either a studio hired me and I was working with different engineers. I would see the same studio get used by different engineers in different ways. Okay. And then I would also travel with those engineers and see how they would change, how they worked based on who they're working for. And then I got to learn several things. One, there are no rules. Two, it's best to be flexible on how you work depending on what you're working on. And then working at different studios on different consoles, you just start to understand, just everything started to click after a couple of years. It's like, this is all the same. You know what I mean? Like signal flow is signal flow. Now it's second nature. In troubleshooting, you just have to really learn how things work quickly. Like, give me the breakdown. Because as an assistant engineer, you have to know the studio and the console much better than the engineer. And I find that as an engineer, I get to walk in and say, I'd like this console to work like this for me today. And the assistant engineer has to know how to do that. I only have to know, show me the mic pre, show me the EQ. You know what I mean? And it was just really wonderful to see that. And then I would work with producers who would change how they produced based on where they were working or who they're working with. And it didn't seem like there was this rigidity in the creative process that I see now. I'm not dogging the industry now or anything, but it just seemed like, as an assistant, not only was I in different studios, but I was working on different formats every day. Analog tape machine, singular, or two of them locked together, or ADATs, or D88s, or radar, or Pro Tools, or radar with a D88 chasing it, or Pro Tools with radar chasing it, or two tape machines locked together. And you just have to have this full tilt awareness of how things actually work. And now I think engineers just know how to use Pro Tools. And that's it. And our B room is a transfer suite, so it has Pro Tools 10, and one of our engineers couldn't figure out how to do a bounce to disk. I'm like, dude, this is a 2-year-old rig or 3-year-old. You know what I mean? So I'm very, very, I just can't even, I'm gushing right now, but I'm so glad I hit this town at that time and got to experience all that stuff and really understand how to record music. Because I think if Avid stopped making Pro Tools tomorrow and no one's rig worked, I wouldn't miss a beat.
Yeah, that would make sense too. The
Yeah.
gear is different in every single studio you set foot in. And even if it is a familiar piece of gear, it might be wired differently. It might be in a different place in the chain. So how did you tackle going from one studio to the other? How long did it take you to learn each studio? And, because you're going in Nashville, there's hundreds of studios. How do you tackle them all?
Well, there were several occasions where I got hired at a studio I'd never been at before as an assistant. And I would challenge myself. The engineer is going to know I've never been here before at some point in the day. Let's see how long I can stretch that out. You know what I mean? And I got pretty damn good at it. I don't know how to describe it. You just get in this zone where like everything's the same. How does this work? Walk up to a console. It's got to have these features. It has to have mic pre's EQs.
Right.
Are the EQs going to, in the channel path, monitor path? How does this work? And who designed the studio? Okay, I know how they designed the other studio. And you just trust nothing. And how that got me prepped for an engineer is when you're working on non-recallable systems, right? I don't want to bash on Pro Tools. I love it. I use it every day. It's been a huge part of my career, and I love it. But the muscle memory you get from working on 10 songs in a day and you pull up a new mix every time you start a song, just the act of getting a new mix every 45 minutes on a song. Hey, we're going to put guitar solos on these 10 songs today. Okay, cool. You pull up Radar, you go to song 1, pull it up. It's just playing music through faders. So you have to get a good mix on the console you're hearing in the control room and the headphones. Boom, boom. That's 2 mixes. Next song, drums might be the same. Everything else is different. You just drop the faders, do it again. And you do that day after day, and you get to understand how to pull up a good mix really fast. And then you get really good at trusting nothing and getting a good vocal sound in like 90 seconds in a room you've never been in. And all these tips and tricks from different engineers, and I have these watershed moments. I assisted a guy who flew in from LA. He mixed a record for like 5 days, and we got done. And I said, do you mind if I ask you a couple questions? And he said, sure. I said, you've never been in the studio before, have you? He goes, no. And I said, you use the studio's monitors. Yeah. You didn't listen to a song that you brought. You didn't listen to anything you knew. And I never put in a mix for you to listen to your car. He's like, no. I said, how does that work? Explain to me how this works. He goes, it's easy. You make it sound as good as you can in the speakers, as good as it can. And then mastering does the rest. If you have a well-balanced mix in a room, it's going to translate to mastering. And that changed how I worked. I don't listen to anything. I walk into a room, I just live in that room and make it sound as good as I can. And it saves so much time. Yeah. Because now assistant engineers really only assist on tracking sessions. But this particular gentleman, we were mixing to a 1/2-inch machine. It was a big project where like saxophone was the lead instrument along with vocal. And the artist wanted a saxophone lick from one chorus to another. And the reason I remember saxophone is saxophone doesn't have a defined start time to a note. And the engineer's like, oh, no, big deal. He goes, Chris, patch track 17 out to the left side of that tape machine. I'll just record that lick on that tape machine and we'll just fly it over. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to be here all night. I'm going to be here all night. He did it the 3rd try. I mean, I literally had like called my wife and canceled dinner. I'm like, this is what we're going to be here all night. He did it the 3rd try. And I've tried to do something similar and it's so hard because for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, on linear recording formats, like anything with tape, digital tape, ADATs, whatever, analog tape, you can't just copy and paste. So you have to take that section, like let's say the first chorus, you had to play that section of saxophone from the first chorus onto a different tape machine, record it, and then you reverse your patches and you play from that 2-track tape machine into a different part of the multi-track, and you record over what's there. Very important. So now we're in no man's land. Now we're in, right? But those two machines have different ballistics. So you hit play and record on one, or you hit play on the multi-track, and you have to hit record at the right time, and the other one has to be spun up into that exact spot on the saxophone on the downbeat, or just after, because it's a saxophone, right? And all you have is a grease pencil to kind of just mark the tape on the 2-track to figure out how to spin it up. And he did it faster than I just explained it, and it blew my mind. And that is a craftsman and a craftsperson or whatever, and that was a mix. So I was assisting on a mix, right? So I don't think there's that much exchange of knowledge now, because there aren't assistants on mixes. There aren't assistant on overdubs much anymore.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I, like yourself, was right around the same time period where I got my start working in Nashville, and I was an assistant, and I was doing the same things that you're describing. But I was lucky enough to hook up with 3 different producers that I worked with on a regular basis. So one of them was doing songwriting demos, one of them was doing artist demos, and one of them was doing masters. Mm-hmm. So I had an opportunity to see 3 different levels or 3 different types of projects. It took me into 3 different levels of studios all the time.
Yes.
And I had to go through that same thing and learn all the gear and all that. But it took a while. It wasn't easy. It wasn't like going from a Pro Tools rig to a Pro Tools rig where you look on the screen and everything looks the same. And no matter what studio you're in, you know how to handle the shortcuts and so forth.
Yep.
But understanding the wiring of the studio and where things get patched in and which pieces of gear are where, it took a while to get used to that stuff. And it was fun. I had a blast doing it. But like you said, I learned so much. I thought I knew what I was doing when I went to my first gig, and I realized very quickly I did not.
Yes.
And I learned more in one day working under Bob Bullock than I ever learned in school.
Yeah.
It was insane.
Yeah, I assisted Bob for a couple of years, and actually he gave me a gift a few years ago. He must have remembered me commenting on it. I said, well, there goes my gig, because it was a comp box. So as an assistant, even doing vocals, you were at the patch bay moving patch cables to different tracks as they recorded onto other tracks. You had to physically patch from track 17 input to 18 input and 18 output to the headphones. And then he had designed and made a box that you just patched all at once, and then it was just done.
Right.
It's like the ATM of assistance. But what I loved about because things happen and you have to just work around it in a session. And then I would stay at that studio, because luckily the studio owners trusted me and they gave me the keys, literally. And I would stay after the session and try to figure out what that engineer did, or what went wrong, or why something happened that I couldn't explain. And when you're working on different formats, it's like, why is the metering different? Or why? Because I'm very curious and I want to know. I don't believe in superstition or like ghosts in the machine or any of that crap. There's a reason everything happens. I want to know why. And I would stay there until I figured it out. And if I didn't figure it out, I would find someone who could explain it to me. And I was like a dog with a bone on this stuff. And I have a very firm grasp on recording. I understand, like, when Pro Tools first came out, you could make a lot of mistakes with disk allocation. It didn't just do it automatically. And to this day, I check my disk allocation when I go to a new studio, because it could go to the wrong hard drive.
Right.
That happened a lot in the 2000s. You know, you do overdubs at the studio, you get into the studio, all my vocals are on this other studio's hard drive
at the studio.
Trust nothing. You know what I mean? And I understand now, through not trusting digital, how accurate analog recording actually is compared to digital. And just all those things. I just had so much fun. And I was young enough where I had energy and didn't really have a a social life or money for a social life. So I would just staying after a session for 3 hours to try to figure out why that microphone had a hum and then it didn't, you know what I mean? Or whatever it was.
I used to do that all the time. You go in, you set up the whole studio. I usually go in the night before, especially for one of Bob's sessions. I would go in the night before,
Yeah.
set it all up, get all the cue boxes in place, get everything going just perfect. Then you get there in the morning and there'd be some sort of hum or there'd be something that doesn't work. And then without fail, you tear it all down and then go back there like a week later and set it all up again and it's just fine.
Yeah. So you have to have it in the moment.
Yeah.
I learned that. It's like, I'm going to stay right here with everything. And this town is great. I'm sure New York and LA are too, but people who you're working for, whether it's a producer, artist, or player or engineer, they know things can get done. And they ask you to do it, and you have to do it. You can't say, oh, it doesn't work like that.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Not in Nashville.
No. So you have to literally look around and say, okay, all this gear knows how to do it. I don't know how to do it. And that's what I challenged myself to when I started engineering. It's like, okay, I've assisted people in this studio for 5 years, whatever studio I was in, and everything that came out of here sounded great. It was a record. And now I'm sitting in the chair. I am the weak link. This hinges on me. There's no excuses. There are no excuses. And I'm not saying everything I did sounded great, but I knew why they didn't. It was me. You know what I mean? And I can't throw the speakers under the bus. I can't throw the microphones under the bus. Nothing. Because yesterday a great record was made here and tomorrow a great record's going to be made here. So it's me.
Oh, I remember exact scenarios. I mean, before I moved to Nashville, I had a studio in New York, and I thought it was great because I built it from the ground up. It was a brand new, beautiful facility, and I was recording rock bands, and it was great. I had probably the market for all the rock bands in the area, and I wanted to take it up a notch. So I moved to Nashville, and I thought I thought I knew it. I thought I was good. I thought it was great. I show up to my first session with Bob and I realize, okay, I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm looking at all these people in this room that are spending thousands of dollars, whether it be on the musicians or the studio itself. And I'm like, I have to learn fast. And not only did I have to learn fast, but then from that moment forward, everything we did had to be fast. And Bob would stress that over and over again. So with that said, are there any things that you learned from Bob or other producers that you could think of?
Yeah, it's the one thing I tell anyone that works for me is efficiency is speed. Because when some people hear you just said Bob says to work fast, they think it's hastily, and it's not. Right? It's not just get it done. It's fast, precision, and it's accurate.
Right.
So as an assistant, when you're working on these bigger sessions, I assist a lot on string dates in Franklin. And I remember very vividly that the engineer said, Chris, is there a pad on that KM84? And I was like, I don't know. He's like, go find out. And I walked down there, kind of wiggle between 5 violin players and flip the pad off, come back, did it in like 90 seconds, maybe 95. And the producer, after they were recording again, said, hey, that cost $100. He said it very politely, but very firmly. So now I tell everyone that works for me, when you put a microphone away, put it in cardioid, flat, no pad. And when you take it out of the locker, look to make sure it's cardioid, flat, no pad.
Right.
Because if someone asks you, you can say it's cardioid, flat, no pad.
Right.
And then they trust you from then on. If you say, I don't know, your credibility went to zero because you put up a microphone and didn't even look at it. It's those things. Knowing what things are, knowing how they're supposed to be set them up right the first time. It's those little things.
I remember being over at Emerald, and it was one of Bob's sessions, and we had all the musicians in the room. The producer was in there with Bob at the console. And like you said, nothing is done hastily. I was in there the night before setting up. That's when you're taking your time and making sure everything is set up exactly the way it's expected to be.
Yep.
And then the next day, when we say fast, we mean fast. Like you said, you know what's going on. You know what the microphones are set at. You know where everything is. But I remember one of the headphone boxes, the headphones went out, and Bob said, "Go." So I go out in the room, I change the headphones, I come back in, and they work for about a take, and then they go out again. And he's like, "Why isn't there another set of headphones out there? You knew it went down once. Why wouldn't you think it would go down again?"
Mm-hmm.
And so now I'm out there with another set of headphones. And I knew that from that point on, I'm going out with 2 sets of headphones, or I'm going out with maybe another cue box to have just on standby ready for something to happen. But you have to be prepared, and you have to know things like that. And that's where the speed part comes in, because like you said, it's money. And I remember Bob saying, "You're spending somebody else's money, and you're spending thousands of dollars right now."
Yeah. And you just have to accept the burden of a singer can take that bridge 52,000 times, and the guitar player can do the solo 180 times and mess up 179. We don't have the luxury, because we are the conduit between creativity and recording. It has to be right, and I take it seriously. But you have to have fun too. But but what I really started watching when I started working with great engineers, because I knew I was building a career, and how do I want to be? And I knew that I have this great opportunity to be in a room with different engineers on a daily basis. I want to learn something from each one of them. I want to learn things I want to do better and things I don't want to do.
That's the key right there.
Yeah, because they're equally important. And I always appreciated after a session when an engineer said, "Oh, hey, by the way, mic pre 10 on the console doesn't work." And I went, "Really? How did I not know that?" And they said, "Well, I just had you patch around it." Instead of, and other engineers would just make a big fit about it and take the session down. Let's just move around it, fix it, not a big deal. And I just love it. I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we can huddle after the fact and do a recap. But right now, in the moment, let's keep everybody's energy up. Let's keep everybody happy.
Yeah, and troubleshooting is just so much fun. And the clock's always ticking. It's like, okay, I'm going to try to fix this for about 2 minutes, and then I'm going to just work around it, or not even, depending.
Do you have any engineers or producers that stood out to you that were ones that you idolized, looked up to?
Man, Paul Worley is just a fantastic producer. Kyle Lenning, I didn't work with Kyle as an engineer or anything, but I've gotten to know him the last 4 or 5 years. But Paul Worley wanted to do a big record here, and he brought his engineer over here, and the artist liked the place, Paul liked the place, and the engineer was like, "I don't know." And Paul said, "Well, I'll get another engineer." And the engineer was like, "Okay, I'll be here." You know what I mean?
We'll make it happen.
We'll make it happen. And I just, and he didn't know me well enough to stick up for the studio, but he was like, "This is the right place, and there's nothing wrong with it. So engineer, And I like that kind of stuff.
Well, let's make that our transition point here, because you do own a studio, and you own a very popular studio. I mean, it's very unique. So before we get too deep into it, how long was it that you transitioned from being an assistant into owning your own studio?
Oh, man. At least a decade. I never really wanted to own a studio. Let me see. I assisted until probably 2002-ish, 3-ish, and then I opened this studio in 2008. Okay, not quite a decade. Yeah, 6 years. Yeah.
All right. So where did the inspiration come from, and why 1979?
The inspiration for having my own studio was most of the studios in Nashville are meant to sound pretty good doing a few things. And I had carved out a career recording rock bands, Americana stuff, people that wanted to make a different sounding record than their last record, or this song has to be really different than the last song, from the drum tones to everything. So I was bringing weird microphones and my own tape machine and all this kind of stuff, different studios. And then once in a while I'd get to go to like New Orleans or whatever and work at these really funky studios where everything felt good and the room sounded interesting, but nothing worked. None of the gear worked, And I worked at artist studios where like, this is really fun to be here, but all this gear doesn't work. And I thought there has to be a middle ground. So then I just started really thinking about like because I knew who I was working with. So I started to make a little list. It's like, I want a big space, a really big space with lots of different rooms. I want a big control room. I want, and then I'm like, well, I guess I want a studio. and then I realized too, because I had a couple kids and I felt this pressure of if I'm not working, I'm not making money.
Right.
And that gets to be, you start making mistakes on how long you work, who you work for, what projects you take. So I knew I wanted a space that I could eventually rent out and be its own entity. So that gave me the scale of which I needed to operate on. But I had no money. So
yeah, right. Well, that's a good point because you picked a very unique location.
Yeah.
So let's start with the location itself. Tell us what that location is like.
Yeah. Well, it's in a part of town that's now called the Nations. When I leased this space, there was no name for this part of town. Like I had to explain where it was. This building is 33,000 square feet. It was vacant and had been for about 5 or 6 years when I first rented. And all I did, I was just driving around and I could tell this building was empty. And then one day I saw some people walking into it. So I just followed them in and it was the owner showing it to a realtor to sell it. This is 2008. Wasn't a good time to sell real estate because the real estate market had crashed. And I said, I'm looking for a space. I said, why don't you just rent me the building for what it costs you to operate it each month? And then in a few years, you can sell it for, a couple $100,000 more. And he goes, that sounds like a good idea. And I was like, really? So I just covered his expenses each month. And it was vacant. The roof leaked. And so I just fixed stuff. I'd come in at night and fix stuff and paint and, record and paint and record and paint and wire and paint and record and paint.
Well, we're 16 years later.
Yeah.
So Are you still renting or did you purchase it?
No, I still rent. I had opportunity to buy the building 3 or 4 times and each time it was a lot of money. And each time I look back, it's like shit. But at the same time, I only lease half the building. So for me to buy it, I would have had to be a landlord. And I think I would have lost my shirt in COVID. You know what I mean? I could see having tenants and then they fold and then I fold. So renting is great. We love our landlord and I get free reign. And now it's kind of come full circle. I don't engineer a lot of sessions. I hire engineers. I had staff engineers for a while. And we've got a whole mastering department with 2 mastering rooms and a transfer suite with an engineer in there and MAR machines with 3 techs. So it's really kind of just everything's growing, but we've really kept our rates where an independent band can come in here for a weekend and not even come close to breaking the bank.
All right. Well, you mentioned several things in there I want to make sure we touch on. First of all was COVID. You said you probably would have lost your shirt. Most people did lose their shirt during that time, and most people in our industry sat at home idle during that time.
Yeah.
How was your studio? How did it survive that time?
The studio, since we're primarily a place where people travel to be together to record, was absolutely empty. And I didn't want to get into the remote mixing thing because we weren't doing that or anything. So we just kind of just waited it out on the studio side of things. I kept my staff on board. We did little things. Tape transfers were big suddenly. Everyone was at home. And they're like, well, I've been meaning to remix that. So once we kind of figured out what COVID was and how to be safe, I just met with our crew and I said, look, guys, we're going to keep you on staff. I said, everything here is paid for. We don't have this big payment every month. If my wife and I are business partners, I said, if the Mars don't make money for a year, we're fine. Our goal, we decided, is to come back when this is done and have everyone still working here so we can just pick up faster. And they all just, their shoulders just dropped. Like, awesome. And then things just started happening, tape transfers. So I just put different engineers. I'm like, hey, look, we've got 14,000 square feet. Let's just each take a corner, pick a bathroom, and bring gear to these different rooms. So we had transfers going on. We had some mix work kind of trickling in. Mastering was very busy, all those things. And then we started picking up tracking sessions when it was safe, and then we go away. And then, you know, we really held true to like, let's just be safe, because I really do think that studios are a host where we're the host for an event, and we're responsible for the people there. Just like I make sure the railings are you know, there, right? And everything's safe. So we were very slow to do tracking sessions and all that kind of stuff. And then Mar Machines really went busy. Anything retail went busy, like vinyl records and mastering. So it was able to kind of augment the studio being slower.
So it used to be a record plant, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was called NTC. Yeah.
Did that assist your decision in calling it 1979 and the theme behind it?
Well, it was this kind of epiphany where I had seen the space and I could rent it. I could do that. I had some gear and I had a tape machine, 24-track tape machine. But I'm like, man, I said to Yoli, I said, I can't rent this and go buy, this is 2008. A Pro Tools rig then was like 40 grand.
Right.
I can't do both because I just don't have the money. And I don't want to just go in debt to be like everybody else. Because then it just like, you know, then it's just, what's your rate? And I hate answering the phone and someone says, what's your rate? And then it kind of hit me. It's like, well, the thing that I don't have, which is Pro Tools, will be the thing that I don't have. I'll just make it the thing. And we only have tape. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then the space looked much like it did as far as the wood on the walls and all that. So it's like, it's welcome to 1979. I do think it branded a little too hard. I mean, 16 years later, people are like, man, I'd come over to your place, but, you know, I need Pro Tools. I'm like, dude, I've got like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rigs. You know what I mean? There's Pro Tools rigs here all over the place. Really?
So you really think branding has hurt you?
You know, it helped and hurt, you know? And maybe that's just people being nice and saying, I don't ever record anywhere, you know? But I do think it's really helped us cultivate the people that work here, the artists that record here. I mean, they send us emails like, look, we don't want to record 10 songs in a day. We want to use a few mics on a drum kit. I'd like to do my record around one microphone. These are the emails I get. And I think it's great when people really come here and want to use the space as part of their record. So that's great.
Anybody that's used the studio now that's done a project that we'd be familiar with?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we've got, oh man, I'm bad at this game. But like, I mean, Pete Townsend's recorded here. Eric Burden from the Animals did an EP here with the Greenhorns, which is great. Lake Street Dive did a huge single here a couple years ago. Man, Lady A now did a record here, or an EP. Yeah, I mean, on and on and on.
So are you still learning as these people come in? Are you still learning from everybody like you were as an assistant?
Yeah, what I do is I pop in every day at like 11, or I leave my office, which is in a different part of the building, come over to the control room, see what's going on, make sure everyone's happy. And then afterwards, I talk to the assistant or the engineer and say, okay, how are you using the space? Like, I see where the mic cables are run, because there's so much space here. I'm always making sure that, like, oh yeah, we've been doing drums in this room. I'm like, oh wow, okay. There's only 4 mic lines in there. Yeah, we've been running mic cables. Oh, then I just run more mic cables to there. Or now with like the Ethernet things are really great, so I have a few of those floating around. And then we had a record that they just the whole thing in the control room, which was great. The assistant engineers did a great job. They just plugged stuff into the back of the mic pre's of the rack. And I was like, well, I'll just wire up 10 mic inputs. Come on, Chris. 10 mic inputs in the control room. So we can do that. You know what I mean? So it's just those kind of things. So now I think, I haven't counted in a while, but I think there's 110 places to plug microphones in. And I have SGI boxes all over, because I just want that. I want creativity to travel at the pace it wants to go. The technical stuff to be ahead of it. And with such a big control room, now the workflow here is everyone tracks with the guitar players in the room with the drummer. And then once their drums are done, why be in a different room? So the guitar players can just grab their pedal board and their guitars, come in the control room, and we can patch out of their rig into an SGI, which is a studio guitar interface, and take it back to wherever room their amp is in. So nobody has to move. And then now there's 2 or 3 guitar players in the control room just doing overdubs together. It's just great.
That was another big lesson that was learned back in the early days, was you wanted to be ready for when creativity struck. You didn't want to be the reason that the creativity was being held up.
Yeah, and to that end, I think of all the things I spend money on, it's mic stands, mic cables, and I don't want to say run-of-the-mill microphones, but I want to make sure I have a lot of microphones. Because as an assistant and an engineer, when an artist had an idea and I didn't have a mic stand at a different studio, or a mic cable, it's like, really? You've got all these great microphones.
Right.
We can do a 9-piece rock band here and have 15 mic stands and 30 mic cables left over. So I tell my crew, never tear anything down. Just keep setting up over the course of the days or whatever, because then everything just starts popping off faster. That harmonica overdub on one song, put up a mic, leave it there. Then the next song, it's going to be a quick background vocal or a finger snap or whatever, and you have a mic there, and then you just keep growing it.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Well, you've also taken a big part in the community itself, and your studio does more than just record. It hosts events. So can you tell us how that came about?
Sure. When I was engineering at different studios, I always had an idea of doing like educational stuff, like tape camps. And I just couldn't make it work financially to rent a studio, block out the days, see if I could get people to show up. You know what I mean? So one of the things I wanted with my own space was the ability to do events. And again, that required a large studio. So kind of right off the bat, we started doing 2 tape camps a year. And now we do, I think most years we do 2 in the spring and 2 in the fall. And that's 10 people come here. Now we just kind of hang out for one day, like a Saturday. We just hang out, talk about gear, listen to some stuff, whatever they want to do. Just 10 people. And then we bring a band in the second day. The attendees choose every microphone, every piece of gear, and they record the band. One person runs a tape machine, one person runs a console, and we switch around. And then the third day, which is optional, I show them how to calibrate a tape machine. And then they do it. So they learn. And really try not to get in the weeds, but learn stuff. And then we do one big event each year called the Recording Summit. We do it in November. And there's 60 people can attend, and about 40 panelists are involved. And people travel from all over the country for that. And it's really fun. We do panels focused around 3 things: music, which is creativity, business, and tech. It's kind of the 3 food groups. And I think they all feed each other, right?
Of course. Absolutely.
And that's been a lot of fun. And the panels come typically from emails or something that happens in a session, and it's a trend, so we do a whole panel on it. Kind of fun. And then like the Grammy Association, they do events here, like listening parties and stuff. Yeah, and it's just really cool.
And that summit this year is going to be November 8th through the 10th.
Correct. Yeah.
So I remember the very first one because I had the privilege of being there and being one of the panelists.
Yeah.
And I also remember sitting on a panel with a good friend of ours, both, Mark Rubel.
Yes.
That was a very memorable time for me.
Yeah. And Mark was such a champion of the event. I mean, I think the first year you probably were on 5 panels, and I was on 5, and Mark was on 10, and Neil Capolino was on 10. It was just like, let's just do all these together. You know what I mean? It was great. And now it's grown so much, and every year 20 people sign up for the next year, and there's no agenda yet. We don't even know what we're doing. So it sells out every year and earlier every year, which is great. It's such a privilege and a responsibility and an honor to have people sign up for an event that they know nothing about. So it's like, okay, they're signing up for something they know is going to be good. So we have to make it good.
Well, I think there's more to it than just the event itself, like you're saying, the music or the business or the tech. There's also the networking and the people that you get to meet, and it's almost like a reunion of sorts, too.
It really is, yeah. And having it take place in a studio gives it this level of comfort. Like the panelists are sitting in front of a console, not amplified. They're not on a stage, and they're talking to people. So it's very conversationalist, and we don't film it. We don't record it. We have a speech every morning about what happens here stays here. If someone says something about a session and they inadvertently or on purpose mention a name, that stays here. I think it gets us to a different level, because I've been on panels at big conferences and got a microphone in front of me, and there's someone in the back with a video camera, on a tripod. I'm personally not really going to go out on a limb. I'm not going to pontificate about an idea I have about how a microphone may or may not work. So this is more of a real good conversation, and we get to some cool places. And I tell panelists when I ask them to be part of it, they're like, well, I don't really know if I have the answer to that. I'm like, that's what I'm talking about. No one has answers. Those are boring. Let's talk about what it could be like, or what or what we think it is. So
I brought up Mark. What's the best memory that you have of Mark?
I was just telling a story to Bobby, our mastering engineer, today about a summit several years ago. We had Bill Petrell come in as our guest of honor to listen to Sheryl Crow Tuesday Night Music Club record that he produced. And I had a few emails with him. He's like, yep, cool, got him a plane ticket. And we never really heard from him. And Saturday night at the summit, everyone's at dinner, and Mark walks in. He goes, have you heard from Bill? I said, no, I haven't. Mark says, what's your plan if he's not in town? I said, Mark, I can't go there right now. I said, we're just going to put all our energy into Bill is here, and he's going to walk in, and we're just going to rock. And Mark's like, I approve of this plan. And Bill walked in, sat down, and Mark had a whole sheet of questions. And Mark asked him one question, and we were off. And Bill, in a very amazing way, just ran. And afterwards, I said, "Great questions, Mark." He's like, Mark said something like, it was kind of like slapping a horse, and it just took off.
Takes
It was
off.
great. So yeah.
Mark was the best. He was absolutely the best. I had plans to go see him play like the week or so before he passed away, and his drummer passed away, and the show was canceled.
Oh,
And it was very sad then, and then just right afterwards, Mark passed away. It was just a hard time.
Yeah.
But we talk about the community. We talk about these times that the community of engineers and producers, they come together. And you've had another very special experience that you've had more recently. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I get. Yeah. My friend Mike Porter, who's a great guy, one of the older gentleman in our community, I guess. Now he's a professor at Belmont. Really has just always kind of helped me out. He put a thing on Facebook that he has a kidney disease and needed a kidney. And if anyone wanted to go get a blood test to see their match, do it. So I was like, well, I'll go do that. I mean, what are the odds, right? And I wasn't a match. And I was like, well, thank God. And and then the doctor's like, well, we have this other thing called a voucher program where you can donate your kidney to somebody you are a match to. And then Mike shoots up the list.
Oh, wow.
And then, yeah. And I said, okay. And they said, well, we'll give you all the tests. We'll give you everything. And I was thinking, well, that's like a free physical. I mean, we're talking CAT scans, PET scans,
Right.
ultrasounds. I mean, everything. It was like almost like the videos of like the Apollo mission, people getting ready. And I did it. And they're like, yeah, you're cleared to do it. And I did some soul searching. And I was like, well, I'm not using this thing. I've never even seen it. He needs it. He's going to go from maybe getting a kidney in 6 years to getting one in 3 months. It's kind of a no-brainer.
How nervous were you?
You know, I have this really weird thing where I don't do research on stuff, certain things like vacations and this, because I didn't really want to know about it, because then I knew I'd back out, which drives my wife bonkers. But I was pretty nervous, and I'll say this: the hospital said, "Look, Chris, anytime you want to back out, we own you down the hall. You can say I don't want to do it." And they said, "We'll tell Mike we found something medically that wouldn't allow you to do it." And I thought that's really freaking cool. But I was nervous, I guess. But I don't know.
Did your wife support it?
Yeah, totally. She didn't get it 100%, but she supported it totally.
And I hear Mike's about to get a kidney?
Tuesday. Yeah. A week from tomorrow. And it's another living donor. Someone in California is giving their kidney up so they can schedule it, and a living donor, that organ lasts twice as long in the new
I didn't know that.
Yeah, because they can plan for it. There's no trauma around it. They can make sure it's an absolute perfect match. Yeah.
I only ask. I mean, my mother, before she passed away, she had a double lung transplant.
Oh, my.
And that was a very difficult thing for her to even sign up for. And she was older, and she's an Italian lady, so she was very short. And they didn't want to give it to her because of her height and because of her age.
Okay.
And in Boston, they're very good at this transplant, but they didn't want to do it. So she went to Pittsburgh, which does a lot more of the transplants, and they were willing to take the risk. But it turned out that they got her lungs from a younger person, so they would fit in her body.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
And so, I mean, I'm all for it. I mean, I've got my donor card and all that stuff, but yeah, it's going to be a very, very hard decision to make, to do what you did, the way you did it.
You know, I mean, sometimes it's just what I learned in business was, because I would always do deals that weren't great deals because it was somebody I knew or somebody I liked their work. So I started just like, I would always cover up the top of the email, you know, and just read it, you know, pretending I didn't know what it was. This is not a good deal. Conversely, with this, it's like, okay, if my kidney is just a tool in my garage that I've never even seen and I'm not using, and somebody really, really needs it, I'm going to give it to them. I'm not going to think a thing of it.
Right.
So that at the end of the day, that's kind of, and that may be very nonchalant, but the doctors gave me every test in the world and said they wouldn't do it if it wasn't good for my body.
Do you think your age came into play?
Yeah, I mean, I talked to my folks and my extended family. I was like, does anyone ever had it, like needed a kidney that I know of? I've never known anybody need a kidney. I'm 49 years old. This thing's used as shit, you know? You know what I mean? I talked to my kids. I'm like, if you guys need a kidney, you're kind of SOL for me. And they're like, we don't care. I'm like, fine. So it was like, it's kind of like a numbers game. It's like an odds, right? If I've lived 50 years and not known anyone that needed one, and now I know somebody, I think I should just go for it.
Well, it's a great thing that you're doing, and
Yeah.
you couldn't be doing it for a better person. So
Yeah. So I mean that's my pitch, and I would do it again. And if someone's in the position they want to do it, and I think Mark Rubel had cancer, and I think it wasn't in the forefront of my mind, but it must have been somewhere in there. My mom had cancer, and you just can't do anything for people
right.
that are sick. And again, it was subconscious. It came out kind of later, maybe through pain medication. But it was like, I can help Mike. I can do something. I mean, I can do something. Not just say, can I bring you some flowers and make you some tea and watch you go through this.
And you extend his life, and you're doing it for his family. And
Yeah. And my life is no different. Somebody asked me last month how I'm feeling. I'm like, what are you talking about?
how long was the recovery?
3 weeks probably.
Was it weird for you to go through this like this far in advance before he actually got a kidney?
Well, he should have had his sooner, but the St. Thomas Hospital, the entire organization was hacked. So they couldn't access patient records for like 3.5 weeks.
Oh, nice.
So it was a pause button on transplants. So it should have been a month sooner.
And that's not the thing you want to put a pause on.
Exactly. Yeah. And shame on whoever did that, because it costs lives,
Oh, yeah.
So in I think my full recovery was like 6 weeks. I was walking around, I couldn't lift stuff for a while, which is fine by me. But 6 weeks, and then it shaves 5.5 years off his search for a kidney, because it was explained to me like the way you go up on the list, and your mom could attest to this, is you have to get sicker to go up the list.
Right.
So you want to go up the list, but you don't want to go up the list. You know what I mean? So it's this weird like mental thing.
Yeah. Well, like I said, it was a very good thing, and I'm sure he's very thankful, and a lot of people look up to you for it. So we all thank you.
Thank you.
On that same note, sir, we have this thing here we call Unsung Heroes, where we take a moment to shine the light on somebody who works behind the scenes or somebody who may have supported you along the way. Do you have anybody you'd like to thank?
Man, I got to say, like, my wife and business partner, Yoli, she doesn't do shows like this. But, man, I'm telling you, people compliment me on the businesses and stuff, but she's the one that, like, makes sure everything is right. I probably would have blown every dollar I had on microphones. She's super smart, great with clients that sometimes I don't know how to deal with. She really can like make it work and grow stuff and support my dumb ideas and make sure they're sharpened a little bit, and doesn't care about any recognition or anything. It's kind of crazy.
Well, thank you to her.
Yeah, totally. And even like the kidney thing, she's like, I don't get it. I don't like this, but hey, you seem pretty hell-bent on it, so go for it. She had to take care of me for a month. You know what I mean?
So Mike should be thanking her as well.
Yeah. Oh, he has. He gets it. He gets it.
A big thanks to Chris for taking the time to share his stories with us. And thank you for taking the time to hang with me here. As always, I really do appreciate it. If you know anyone that would appreciate hearing Chris's story, please be sure to pass this along. You can do that and find the links to everything mentioned over at jfranzi.com/episode 89. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to The Jay Franzi Show. Make sure you visit us at jfranzi.com. Follow, connect, and say hello. This episode has been brought to you by VR Knives, your source for 100% custom knives made by a true rock star. So, if you're in the market for a new piece of art, reach out to VR Knives. 407-421-5528. 407-421-5528.